Hey guys, what's up? It's Alex or Nuzz here, and today I wanted to speak on something that I've been thinking about and sort of just researching a bit for the past few months, and that is the viewpoint on Endgame in Runescape. Is Runescape's Endgame amazing, or does it leave a lot to be desired? Does it stack up to the more modern MMOs? Does it even beat those out, or is it not keeping up with the times? We're gonna dive into that and so much more in this video. Make sure you check that you're actually subscribed if you think you did subscribe to me. As many times I think I've been subscribed to somebody for years and I just wasn't. YouTube is just weird sometimes. Let's see if we can get to 35k. We are super close and that would be an awesome milestone to hit. Alright, let's dive into this. I think this one is going to be pretty interesting and I'm really curious to hear you guys' thoughts. So for as long as I can remember, making it to the end game in RuneScape was basically my main goal. Basically since it, 2010, 2011, when like Dungeoneering came out, my goal was to essentially max my account and be able to do all the higher level PVM, do all the fun cool stuff to get all those big drops. That was my big goal. I remember in the very early days, pre-OC, maybe like 2012, I remember doing, Bandos God Wars, trying to get drops. I was using my Chaotic Rapier and, the old school setup, and I was hoping to eventually get high enough level and enough money so I could do something like Nex. I never ended up being able to do Nex pre-EOC, but that was always a big goal of mine, seeing as like Torva was sort of like the iconic set, the set that was like, okay, you're good at PVM, you're rich, you're the big honcho, you've got Torva. That and like an Elysian or Divine were the big ticket items back then. So I guess this sort of mindset of wanting to, get these big items that kind of either show a status, like rares, party hats, or items that show a status, but also help you improve at PVM and help you go on to do harder and harder bosses was always something that I really enjoyed in an MMO, and something that I think kind of swayed my mindset for a good bit of years, seeing as I started RuneScape when I was like 8 years old and played it ever since. So my mindset has kind of been on that as an aspect of, endgame in video games that I really like. Loot is a huge thing in video games. It's why I like games like Borderlands and Path of Exile. The loot is just absolutely massive. There's tons of it. There's big ticket items you can go after. And for me, that is what kind of, makes RuneScape endgame for me very fun and interesting. Now, something that I recently did, and I'm not going to touch on this for too long because I find it very interesting and prevalent to this topic, but I don't want to go into a spew on a different game. I've been playing Lost Ark recently. I have over 200 hours, and most people started Lost Ark a year ago, not in 2023, but it was my first time really playing a big time modern MMO that wasn't something older like World of Warcraft. So it was kind of a really different experience going into it, and something that I noticed in Lost Ark, essentially items aren't really RNG based too much. You don't really go for big ticket items. You just slowly upgrade your gear and your item level with materials. So imagine in RuneScape that throughout PVM and stuff, you get these little materials, you get these little shards that you can eventually use to upgrade the tier of your armor. So if you did a ton of bosses, a ton of Raksha, you would eventually get enough shards to upgrade your, tier 80 weapon into a tier 85 weapon, and so on. There aren't really that many RNG based drops. There aren't really that many things to chase. It's more of a slow grind up the item level ladder. And I've got to say, the weird thing about that game is I kind of had the opposite effect as I did with RuneScape. So in that game, I so much enjoyed the early game. I was having so much fun. I did, early game, figuring the game out, essentially going from, in that game, item tier level like 0 all the way up to 1300. It was super fun, and I was actually very addicted to the game. But then once I hit endgame, I actually got very bored. So in Lost Ark, just a brief thing about the end game, essentially bosses are time gated. A lot of the stuff is time gated and they don't really have a huge purpose. So for instance, you can do a weekly raid on there, which takes around 30 minutes, but you can only do it once per week. Now we do have that in RuneScape, but raids in Lost Ark are basically the main endgame. So I would go on and I'd do a raid and then I'd kind of be out of things to do. Now I could go and do something called a Guardian raid, which essentially is like a mini boss fight, and it's very, very fun. But the thing about those is you can only kill them twice a day for loot. And there's like 30 of them, so you have to pick 2 per day. You can kill them for loot, takes about 10-15 minutes, and then that's it. You can't kill them for loot again. There's no point in killing them anymore. I mean, you can actually go in and kill them, but you get absolutely no loot. And I found myself logging in for about an hour, doing a few bosses, and then being like, I have nothing else to do, nothing else to chase, nothing else to go for. None of the bosses had boss pets like RuneScape 3, where I could kill the bosses and have a potential at a pet. Even though it's not an endgame item, it's still a really cool drop that you can show off to people. This game didn't really have any of that, so I found myself just not wanting to log in at the end game, and that brought me to thinking about RuneScape's endgame and early game and kind of how it compares. And I just kind of started thinking, like, what if RuneScape had the Lost Ark MMO sort of mantra in, you know, let's say elite dungeons. Let's say you could only do elite dungeons once per week for loot, and then after that you couldn't even enter them. Not only could you not get loot, you couldn't enter them. And then, you know, let's say normal bosses, what if you could only kill them twice per day for loot? Honestly, the game is a lot different in how item level works, so it's not like the scaling is bad, but I find the content just to be lacking. Something I really enjoy about RuneScape 3's endgame is the fact that I can grind as much as I want to. If I only have an hour in the day to do a boss, well then I only have an hour in a day to do a boss. But if I have a lot of time and I'm like, I'm super addicted right now, I really want to play for like 6-7 hours this day and grind out this boss and try to get a lot of loot, I can do that. In Lost Ark, I really couldn't do that. If I wanted to grind bosses for 7-8 hours, it just wasn't possible. And that's what I found super interesting. In modern MMOs that I've played recently, I felt myself enjoying it a ton until I get to the end game, and then I'm just bored. Where in RuneScape, I feel like it's kind of always been the opposite for me. Like when I, you know, played on a new account before, or my mid-level, or if I was, you know, when I was going to get max, I felt a lot more, you know, just bored and not interested and just not really enjoying the early mid game and just waiting to get to that end game where I could finally have a ton of fun, and then getting to the end game and actually having a ton of fun. But in the other games, I felt myself really enjoying the early game and then becoming bored when I hit the end game. So I found this quite interesting as a contrast between, you know, RuneScape 3 and some of the other modern MMOs. But like, what makes RuneScape 3's endgame so special, and is it actually special? Is it actually interesting and fun, or could they learn something from these more modern MMOs? So like I said, the thing I love is grinding for, you know, as long as I want to get an item in RuneScape, but that also leaves another factor, which is going dry. I mean, it's just something that is going to happen. It's happened to me on the Archglacier for the Core of Lang, and it's something that is, you know, just in games with RNG drops, games that have, you know, super rare drops like kill a boss and you have a potential of a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 2,000 drop, it's just gonna happen. So for me, I think the dry streaks and stuff, while they do suck, I think that the endgame is still very good, and I don't want to get in on like bad luck mitigation and stuff into this video, because that wasn't what this video is for. But what I did want to talk about is sort of the trade-off there, which is, you know, in Lost Ark, when I was getting to endgame, although the endgame didn't seem quite nearly as fun as it was in RuneScape 3, getting there only took me like, you know, 120 hours. And in RuneScape, we know if you go on and you start on a level 3 account and you don't use like Treasure Hunter, which I did not use any MTX on Lost Ark, even though they have it. If you start on a level 3 on RuneScape 3 and you're not using Treasure Hunter, it is going to take you a lot more than 100 hours to reach Endgame, where you can do things like Zamrock, Archglacior, AOD, some of the very endgame bosses. It is going to take you hundreds, if not thousands of hours to get there. So yes, the endgame in RuneScape is more vast, and you can grind for thousands of hours and kill a huge variety of bosses, but the time it takes to get there is exponentially longer than some of the modern MMOs. So while I do think RuneScape's endgame is one of the best endgames in MMOs, it's one of my favorites. It's kept me, interested for thousands and thousands of hours, for years. It has kept me interested more than any game has ever done. RuneScape has done. There's not a single game that I've played longer or held my interest for longer than RuneScape, but that comes with a price, in that if you're a new player getting on and you want to get to endgame, it's not as simple as spending 10-20 hours, not as simple as spending 100 hours. You're just going to spend an absolute ton of time, and you have to commit an absolute ton of time to the game. Of course, there is Treasure Hunter, but maxing with Treasure Hunter is very costly. Like, it is not cheap to get keys, especially early on. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest kind of points of contention. Do you guys think that well, first of all, do you think that RuneScape's endgame is as good as I think it is? Do you think it needs any work? Would you change loot? How do you think it compares to the modern MMOs? I'm curious if you played like Lost Ark, New World, anything like that. How do you think it compares? And if you do think RuneScape's endgame is, good, or however you feel, do you think the time it takes to get there is too long? I know there's been a ton of, changes. The XP rates have gone up a ton in RuneScape 3, yet it still takes a long time to max. I believe it's even worse for old school RuneScape, but yeah, I think this was an interesting topic, and I kind of rambled a bit, but I really found this fun to look into and kind of give my thoughts on after playing these other games, because like I said, I haven't had much experience with the newer MMOs, and it was a pretty big contrast, and it actually made me kind of thankful for a lot of the end game in RuneScape. So let me know below. Again, sorry for a bit of a ramble, but I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I don't do these too often, but yeah, I thought it was a topic that was really fun. And yeah, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, as it really helps me out. Let's see if we can get to like 300 likes. That would be super cool. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Got some very, very exciting stuff coming up.